Hey guys, what's up? This is Donnie, and I've recently become aware that using DotNetFiddle, since we have, because of the pandemic and needing everybody kind of to have access to an IDE or to a compiler, I should say, since not everybody can easily download Visual Studio, and even if they do, everybody is going to have different versions based on their computer. This situation of everybody using DotNetFiddle, specifically our class using DotNetFiddle, has caused some confusion around the concept of context and scope. So I'm going to try as quickly as possible to clarify that. Start off by examining what the problem actually is. So we've been using .NET in script mode, and this is the essence of the problem that has arisen just now after 15 years of me teaching this class. Uh, this just now is kind of becoming an issue. So we've never been able to do this before until we started using .NET in my classes. So script mode starts with nothing and it allows you to do things like this. Int x equals 5. And then you can do system.console.writeLine x. So it's like it printed the value of x. Now the real question is about this variable. Now I've been telling you recently, since we've been starting object-oriented programming, that everything in C# exists in the context of an object. And to paraphrase that, you cannot have a variable or a method, which we're going to learn methods soon. A method is basically a function that belongs to an object, which is, everything belongs to an object in C#. But here lies the confusion, is that what does X belong to? In this example, in script mode, there's nothing for it to belong to, at least nothing that we can see. That's the problem. It actually does belong to something, but because script mode is kind of smoke and mirrors hiding something. And you can see what it's hiding in both .NET and in Visual Studio when you don't use, the script mode that hides the truth from you. So if you create a new, just a plain old console application in um, C# in Visual Studio, you'll notice that it comes with all this boilerplate code. We focus on two things, is that one, it gives us a class, and two, it gives us a main method. So we here, if we're going to do the same thing that we did before, and just declare int x equals 5, and then print out the value of x, and we can see very clearly that it's no different than the other program we wrote. We still have 5. The difference is here when we ask ourselves, what does 5 belong to? It actually has an answer. If x isn't floating in the middle of nowhere, it has scope. It has context. So let me use some different language to give you the different ways programmers talk. We would say the scope of x is the main method. And for all intents and purposes, just refer to this as the main method. It doesn't even actually matter what these things are, as long as you understand that there's something that is each one of these is something that is beginning and something that is ending, which gives it meaning. So as long as you understand that in this case, instead of just saying int x equals 5 in the middle of outer space with nothing really around it to give it context, it doesn't really make any sense in object-oriented programming. But here it does, because int is within the scope of this, which is the main method. So this is the begin of the main method, this is the end of the main method, and the end of the main method actually in this case is the end of the program. So just like if we were to say if that's going to be an error, but I don't care. So if we were to say, inside of an if statement here, int y equals 6, we wouldn't be able to access y down here, because In this case, I think we've talked about this, the variable y exists within the context of the if statement, or some other language that we use is, y is in the scope of the if statement. So this is a scope. We say the variable was declared in the scope of the if statement. Therefore, when the scope of the if statement ends, the variable ceases to exist. So that's one way to say it, or you could say y is in the context of the if statement. By declaring the variable inside of that begin and the end, we make it only accessible in the begin and the end. And that is preferable if the rest of the program does not need this variable. So you have to be careful where you're declaring it and why. Like if this is a variable that mattered down, somewhere else down at the bottom of the program, I wouldn't declare it there. I would declare it in the scope of the main program, which now makes it accessible on line 16. So that's just like a mini version of scope with like an if statement or anything that has a begin and an end. But in this case, it's important to understand that we're dealing with bigger things here. We're dealing with a class, and that class has, what amounts to an action. So this action is happening within the context of the class, and that gives it context. It's not nowhere. It's an action that's happening from a thing that's performing the action. That's what I mean when I say it's something that gives it context. A baseball bat doesn't swing itself, right? A baseball player swings a baseball bat. So that would be kind of like, you can use any analogy you want, but that's the context. Which brings us to DotNetFiddle, and if we code it like we've been coding it all along, it allows you to declare things with no scope at all, which is confusing. So if you want the true object-oriented experience, you switch this over to console mode, and notice when we hit OK, we get the same exact boilerplate code that we got in Visual Studio. So this is the truth. Like this is the truth behind the magic. Script mode is hiding this from you and basically making it's making it so the first line of code is really, the first line of code inside of the main method of the outer line class. So it's hiding the real details of what's going on when you go to script mode. And that leads us to finally explain about a pattern of scoping things for classes. And that pattern is pretty simple. So here's the rub. In Visual Studio, gives us the ability to put the classes in their own file. So if I say, I'm just going to keep it super simple. I'll just say every person has a name. So there's my class, and notice it's in a different file. See, over here we have the Solution Explorer, which lets me switch back and forth between the main program and the class. So this makes scope much easier to visualize because basically, if I get rid of all of this, this is, for all intents and purposes, the first line of code in our program. And our class might not even be used. Like I could run this program right now. There's nothing wrong with it at all. So the program ran, nothing happened. I didn't have any real code. Just because I created a class that didn't get used, that's not a problem. In Visual Studio, it's simple. Every class gets its own file. So when you're in a class like this, person, you don't declare anything here. No. So if you're in a class file in Visual Studio, you're in there in order to define the class. So inside of the class, you want to put the member variables, which we definitely have talked about so far, and the member method declarations. And that's basically it. To simplify it. Inside of the class, you define its members, and that's it. Just like we do right here below it. So this is, a declaration of a member variable, so that out in the main program, we can say person p1 equals new person and give them a name. And the reason that this is visible, like the reason that over here in this other file we know about that class, is because they're in the same namespace. Console app 25, console app 25. That basically says, these files are sharing a space of visibility. So it's pretty simple. In Visual Studio, there's no problem with people understanding scope when we're doing object-oriented programming because every class has its own file, and it's like, you only write things inside of the class. So it usually becomes pretty easy. It's like, when it gets a little more into it, it's like public int age. So you declare your member variables, and if you haven't seen methods yet, it'll be like something like this. It'll be like public int add two numbers int x comma int y, just like we've done with when we learned functions and procedural programming, and return x plus y. The difference here is that this function is not floating in the middle of nowhere. This function is inside of the person context, which means that add two numbers now has a different meaning altogether. It's not just a function adding two numbers, it's a person adding two numbers. The person is actually performing this action of adding the two numbers together. So now it has context instead of just functionality. No pun intended. Um, so in Visual Studio, it's really not an issue. I've never really had to do this video to explain it. The problem is if we're in script mode, how do we deal with multiple classes? Script mode is like just basically paste your class at the top of the file, and I imagine if you have more than one class, you have you just go class, 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 have a list of classes. I think other IDEs, or maybe even this one, options. Oh, okay. I don't know if this one has it. Tidia. There might be an option here to do what we have in Visual Studio, which is, have multiple files. But I haven't used .NETFiddle enough to kind of figure out how to do that. And this is the way we've been doing it. We've been saying, well, declare your class and then write your code, which is this. So that same exact example that we were just doing is okay. But the problem is that it looks weird because it's like there's a class definition, and then now all of a sudden we have this code that has no context anymore. So I thought that using script mode was going to be the easiest way to accomplish these things, but I don't know how to get around the confusion of script mode hiding the actual scope of this code right here. This code right here is supposed to be inside of the main method of the program class, and typically isolated from this code over here. And the way it reads right now is like this is, these instructions are reading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, like all the way down, straight down, and that is not the way this works at all. This class is totally on the side, and it's not even necessary that we're using it. I might have to find a new online compiler that supports multiple files, or I might ask that you use Visual Studio. I think I'm probably going to try to find an online compiler that supports multiple files because that's really the easiest solution to this. Anyway, the important thing is for now, I want you to understand um, that everything in object-oriented programming is in the context of an object. This the ability to in script mode to say int x equals 5 is not normal. That's not normal C sharp. There's no obvious place that X belongs, like what object or class owns X. So just realize that doing things in script mode in .NETFiddle it can make code that is not inside of a begin or an end like these confusing because there's no concept of scope or context. This is just kind of like a band-aid video to help people understand context in the short term for this semester. I'll as soon as I find a new online compiler, I can probably either remake my videos or just create a new video to um, focus on scope and context and show how it works, without even mentioning script mode. Because, like I said, script mode is the whole reason behind this whole confusion about, you know, where do I define things? Should it be before the begin, after the end? It's all that confusion is based on, I think, this, the example of code not even having a scope. Um, so anyway, that's what I'm going to do for now, and I will think about it some more in order to give you more than a band-aid on the cut. So I'm going to stop the video now in the name of time, and I will hopefully talk about it more tonight when I see you guys, and I will think about a long-term solution to the problem. All right, thanks, bye.